we are getting really late for seeding anything perennial, perhaps ryegrass and Timothy would still establish okay, but everything else you're just going to have, if it gets established, you will have lower yield next year. Some of the annuals we can still plant, especially rye, triticale, wheat for forage in the spring. But the perennials, I would really urge against it at this point, especially with the dry weather that we're in right now. If you get any delay at all in germination and emergence, that's just going to put you even worse off. So that's my feeling at this point. We're probably 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks past when we should be seeding.
You could always have an option for a dormant seeding later. It could be in the December timeframe or early or late February, early March. That would be a better option for the producer, Julia. And again, depending on what they want to seed, a frost seeding might work well if they're looking at clovers and timothy and those rounded seeds. But if they're looking at more of your traditional cool season grasses, then a direct seeding of some kind where to get better seed to soil contact. But yeah, for money well spent, I would wait till a later seeding time now.
And right now, if a good question to ask is, do they know what their fertility and pH is? Right now is a great time to prepare for seeding next year, to get lime on if the pH is low, to get P and K, phosphorus and potassium on if those levels are low, and get everything ready. Kill perennial weeds is a great time in the fall, so you can take care of all those issues that can become a real problem and a real headache in a new seeding and on into the years of from there if you don't take care of them ahead of time. So it's a great time now to prepare and then really be ready come spring to roll as soon as we get those first breaks in the weather and the soil's right, or frost seeding like Dave mentioned.
Any more questions for our panel?
Yeah, I've got a question. I'm in Fayette County, Ohio here, and raised some grain and cattle, and had put on alfalfa, seeded it into wheat on the 20th of April, and the alfalfa sprouted. Planted it with a 750 no-till drill in the grass seed box. Planted it at about 25 pounds the acre. The alfalfa came up and it got about 4 inches tall, and that's about all the taller it got. I've had soil tests done. The pH and nutrient values are where they're supposed to be. I know we were significantly drier this year than in the past, but I'm just curious, is there anything that I could do? I mean, I know I can't make it rain, but is there anything that I did wrong, or anything like that? Or is it just Mother Nature was against me this year?
So did you take the wheat to grain harvest then?
No, sir. I mowed the wheat about the 1st of July. And we made sure the alfalfa was about 4 inches tall at that point. We raised the cutter bar up so we didn't cut the top of the alfalfa off. We cut it pretty high, about 6-8 inches off the ground, trying to let the small alfalfa, not cut it off and hurt it that route. But no, we just made wet hay off of it. We cut it one day, baled it the next, tried to minimize, our impact on the ground. But
and then it just hasn't grown much since then, is that right?
No, sir, not at all. We haven't gotten better cutting off of it. And I don't know if it's just rain or
I'm thinking the dry weather's really holding it back. The stand, it sounds like the stand is there and good. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised next spring, would be my thought. And if we get some rain this fall, don't be tempted to cut it if it grows. let it grow. And yeah, so if your fertility levels are good, there's really not much you can do, but yeah, pray for some rain. That would help it grow this fall. Actually, dry weather is good for cold hardening. These cold nights in the dry weather, alfalfa tends to start hardening up for the winter. We're maybe a little early, but um, it's better than too wet to get it nice and cold hardy for the winter. So,
Well, I guess that's the only good part is it's definitely got good roots on it, you know, going down and getting the moisture. I guess because we
have
planted,
have you dug some up?
yes, yes.
Okay,
It's got a
great.
taproot about 8 inches long on it. I'm pretty impressed. It's growing. It's just not growing above the ground. Uh,
Yeah, I would say it's just dry weather, and yeah, it should do really well. It sounds a little bit like a situation where I planted, the latest I planted alfalfa in the spring was around June 1st, the first week of June, which is way, way past recommended, but it was one of the first seedings I made of Roundup Ready. So I wasn't so worried about the weed control in the summer. We were able to control the weeds. It came up, we got a nice stand, and it sat there, just like you're describing, 4 or 5 inches tall the whole summer. And then in the fall, I think we had a little more growth, but the next year it was beautiful. So I think it's just establishing the roots sound like they've gone down and you're in good shape, I would say, for next year.
okay. Just kind of a follow up on this. We are starting to see some weed and grass pressure because it is in rows. It wasn't broadcasted. Do you think next year the alfalfa is going to come up and shade that out? Or you think instead of a pure alfalfa stand, we're now going to have an alfalfa grass mix stand?
Hmm. Do you know what kind of grasses?
So just it well, we could call it Kentucky bluegrass, but I'm not sure that's the official name for it. And then some wild clover. We sprayed this off before we planted the wheat, but some wild clovers actually come up in it, red clover, and it's kind of taken over. It's kind of impressive the way it's growing.
Huh. Yeah, if they're perennials, you'll have some of them in there. Anyone else want to chime in? I think they'll still be there. The grasses will be more prevalent in the spring, and then as summer comes on, the alfalfa should dominate. As it gets drier, normally it would be growing more through the summer than the grasses, and even probably more than the clover as well. But the clover and grass will be there in the spring. There's not much you can do about the clover and alfalfa. The grasses, if you really don't want them, you could use Select or something like that.
Okay,
Raptor.
thank you.
Yeah, good questions. Any
A-
other thoughts,
yeah,
guys?
any more questions for our panel?
Any comments from the group about for a new seeding like that is the height of your cutting for that, especially maybe that first cutting, so you're not taking too much and leaving enough of a residual there for it to grow back.
Well, yeah, on alfalfa, you can cut it short because the best regrowth comes back from the crown shoots. If you want the grass to have more of a chance, you would raise the cutter bar. So like especially orchard grass alfalfa mixes, I've been hearing from colleagues around the country that a lot of producers are feeling like fescue, orchard grass and even fescue aren't persisting in alfalfa or aren't persisting in hay stands like they used to, but where most of us are using disc mowers now, and they cut really short, a lot shorter than sickle bar mowers. And so if you're cutting the grass at 2 inches consistently, you're starving it because
Mhm.
its root reserves are in that stem base. So it needs at least a 3-inch stubble, and 4 would even favor it more. So it depends what your goal is there. If you want pure alfalfa, probably cut it shorter. If you, that would favor the alfalfa. If you want some grass in it, cut it taller, 3-4 inches tall, 3.5.
I was thinking the same thing because I've been out on some recent hay fields, and I was just kind of surprised at how short it was. And these were predominantly grass fields, and I thought they were cut way too short to have enough to have the grass to bounce back. And the producer commented that he's been frustrated with his yields over the last few years. Well, you know, we've had a couple wet years, so you kind of got to throw those out a little bit. But I commented on the shortness of it there. And he said the same thing. He had a disc mower now, and they just put it down and go. And I said, well, sometimes you might want to leave it up a little before you go. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And I've noticed that, and I think we talked about this at a field day down at the Jackson station last year. And they were commenting, well, we got it as high as it'll go. And I said, well, it's too short still. I think you need to buy the aftermarket shoes or something that'll raise it more. We need to talk to the manufacturers of these. They need to have it be standard to be able to raise it more, you know, at least up to 3 inches.
well, I believe you can also put some sort of stop to on your hydraulic thing there
Okay.
too, much like you might do on a bush hog or something like that, so you don't drop it. That'd be something at least to look into or talk to your equipment manufacturer about it, just to give yourself more control and give you some options so you don't burn it out quite as quick. So just an observation on my side.
Yeah, good idea.
Guys, I get I get a lot of questions of folks. They want to reseed their old pasture, and they want to cut corners. Bob's smiling. They want to cut corners, and I try to encourage them not to, but I get a lot of folks that just maybe want to hit it lightly with a disc and then broadcast some grass on it, and they think that's going to fix it. And I try to encourage them not to do that because they're wasting resources. But what's a good recommendation for somebody like that really just wants to cut the corners? Or is there?
I don't know if there's any good corners to be cut. You want to try and look at what the worst problem is. So one thing, I'd take that soil test first
Right.
and see if one of their concerns isn't fertility. And if you correct the fertility, they may have enough plants there that just need to be fed or have enough fertility to express themselves better. And then I almost always see there's generally not enough legume in our pasture fields, so the frost seeding is an easy cost-cutting measure, I guess. It's the cheapest way to improve a pasture field is putting on some red and white clovers early in the spring, late winter, that February to March timeframe, and try to get some more legumes in there. But if your pH isn't there, those
Right.
legumes won't survive either, or at least not long term. So and if that's an issue, then you may want to look at other type of legumes that could tolerate lower pHs, but you still aren't going to increase your production like you would if you could correct the fertility problems. But if you have just a weedy, what I'll call an old pasture, just over abused, and there's more weeds than more undesirable than desirables. Isn't that what we used to call them, Dave? No? There's more undesirables than there is desirable plants. Then you may be looking at a total renovation where we have to go in and kill everything and just start all over again. You usually don't want to get there to that point, but I know there's fields like that. We can use the animals to help us a little bit. So if you have grazing animals, maybe putting them out there in the winter time to cut it down and let them do some prep work for you, and then come back and do that frost seeding establishment as well, is another way of getting some of that, letting the animals work for you.
I get a lot of folks that want to try to frost seed grass, and Bob and I have talked about that. I was telling them it's really not recommended practice, right?
It's like throwing feathers in the wind.
That's why I try to tell them. Okay.
Especially a lot of now the Timothy you could do that with, but Timothy isn't one of our better pasture type grasses.
Right.
Orchard grass and tall fescue and ryegrass and broom grass even more so are just, you can't do it unless you need to drill them in. And you could use a conventional drill, even if it's not a no-till drill, if you pick the right day when the soil's soft, and you can get through there and interseed into a stand, but you want to make sure the competition isn't there.
So Bob, how do you prepare your pastures where you know you want to frost seed? Do you graze them harder in the fall and into the winter?
Especially in the winter months, I'll graze them very tight in the winter months. So my best pastures to frost seed are the ones I stockpiled and winter graze, and we'll graze those existing grasses down pretty tight and stay out there and let the cows almost abuse them. I hate to use that word, but I call it more like we're preparing the site for a good frost seeding. Then ideally, it's best if you can frost seed and still have the cows out there or the grazing animals, and let them kind of walk around and push that clover seed into the soil. You'll get even a better stand. And then if you can control the animals with electric fencing, or you can get them to walk over every square foot, if you just got 10 cows on 20 acres, they're not going to be working for you nearly as well as if you had those 20 cows on 1/10 of an acre for a day and then move them to another spot. But that's how I prepare a lot of my pasture fields for the frost seedings, is the winter before.
Well, another thing to keep in mind too is a lot of the soil and water districts around the state have seeders available for rent. And if you get a site prepared, that allows you to maybe include those grasses with a no-till seeder that you could get in there in that, late February, early March, when you have that freeze and thawing happening overnight. You get up real early in the morning and start that seeding. You can maybe get in there and again, not leave a lot of track or put a lot of I guess make more problems with a seeding like that. And that way you could get some improved grasses in there as well. Would anybody in the group want to talk a little bit maybe about a conversion comparison where you may be trying to get out of the fescue and into, say, the prairie or whatnot? There's been a lot of good examples of using summer annuals to fill a gap in there where you can kill off that fescue, put in some sorghum Sudan or some stuff that can handle the heat as a transition year to convert a pasture, whether it's to improve cool seasons or maybe native grasses. So I don't know, Jason, would you like to maybe comment on some of the experiments that you've seen and some of the successes we're having in different parts of Southern Ohio?
Sure. And then I have a question for the group on maybe incorporating more annuals into these conversions. Just some thoughts on the different forages available. But yeah, we've started to have a lot of successes converting either old cool season grass pasture to warm season grass pastures and perennial pastures. And those are a complete renovation. And like Dave said, incorporating the native grass or the native forages to those conversions is a really good option, because I feel like it probably conditions the soil really well and allows them to have harvestable forage, whether you're grazing it or hanging it through that transition. But the question I had for the group is, consider there was a producer in a corn soybeans rotation, or they're going to do a fall kill of fescue, and they're going to seed, say, wheat, rye, or triticale, or an annual ryegrass possibly, to potentially graze late winter or early spring. What would be some of the advantages and disadvantages to some of those forages for grazing in the spring, with intentions in the spring to incorporate a warm season annual or perennial into that in, say, May? So like between triticale and rye and wheat, annual ryegrass, are there some that stick out to you as, you know, better potentials for grazing and conditioning that land to be seeded with either warm season annuals or warm season perennial grasses?
Yeah, there's pros and cons. Bob or Dave, chime in here. Rye is the most winter hardy, probably would come on the earliest in the spring. So if you want early spring grazing, that one would come on earlier even than wheat and triticale. But then the cons or the danger of that is if it's too wet. So depends on the field. If it lays wet at all, you can't get in there early. You'd be tromping it all up. That would be the danger with the spring grazing of these annuals. You'd want places where you have good drainage. I know we have side hill seeps though too that you have to contend with in a lot of the state, in the southern part of the state. But so that would be the one danger of those spring grazing. Triticale and wheat would come on later. Italian ryegrass would also, and Italian ryegrass would probably last a little longer and go to seed, start going to seed in May. But if you grazed it off, you can actually get several grazings. We've gotten 3 cuttings on it just in a cutting situation into the end of June or even sometimes July, depending on the rain. So that might go too long, probably would be going too long. You'd have to kill it to plant your perennial natives in May. So I would lean probably more towards the rye, wheat, or triticale in that situation, because you could probably graze them out or graze them off and they won't be coming back as much.
We've seen some good results with rye, cereal rye. So
yeah. It's just, yeah, if you stay on it and you're ready to go early, it can work great. If you let it get away from you, then then you're in trouble.
You got to have enough animals to be able to handle all the production that rye gives you if you want to try and terminate it to get another crop planted in the ideal time.
Yeah.
So many of those winter annuals, they're at their peak.
You're on mute.
Am I?
No, you're not muted.
No, I'm not muted. But we want to try and get those, many times they're in conflict of the small grains with the planting time for your new permanent seeding. So, and it's becomes a real management issue of trying to get control of what's growing and then try to get your new seeding established. So that's one of the things. Don't want to do a whole lot of acres at one time.
Yeah,
You
good
can manage.
point.
Hey, Bob, don't I recall some guidance years ago when we were first starting to seed native grasses, the allelopathic effect of ryegrass could suppress, I just recall Big Blue and Indian being a real, transfer problem there.
Yes, and cereal rye as well. So if you're going to use the native grasses, many of those are, some of the seasonal annuals have a lot of allelopathic effect on some of our native plants, much more so than our non-native plants. So I would tend to be
Yeah.
shy of planting my native
Bob,
corn seasons after a winter small grain, or even
Yeah.
even the ryegrass.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, the ryegrass I know can be allelopathic towards corn. In Brazil,
Yes.
they use a lot of ryegrass as a cover crop, winter cover crop, and they say you got to wait 2 or 3 weeks after desiccating it before you go to corn.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Just another management issue to work around. So you got to kill it and wait.
yeah, how do we,
Folks, this has been good conversation today. I appreciate the question and answer, but our time is up.
Oh.
So if you